David Nair, all the way from down under Brisbane, Australia, welcoming you to David Nair On Air. Ladies and gentlemen, this broadcast is viewed by audiences in India, South Australia, South Africa, UAE, US, Canada, UK, Europe, Malaysia, Singapore, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Ukraine, Spain, Switzerland, and Russia. Totally thrilled with the spread and reach of audience that we've been having for the last number of months. I welcome each one of you participants to start looking at raising some questions. We have an excellent speaker here today. I'm going to give you a brief about it shortly. If you do not have any questions on now, but you'd like to raise the questions later, do not hesitate to drop me an email. I should say drop the team an email at support@davidnair.net. David Nair is a peak performance coach, keynote speaker, and author of the book titled IXL, Right for Success. Ladies and gentlemen, my key purpose for reason of getting online is primarily to create a mindset shift, heart set shift, and a soul set shift in 1 million people to help them live their lifestyle and that of the next generation, thereby leaving behind a legacy of hope. That's the prime reason why I decided to go into India and some of the Asian countries, start working with it in the late 90s. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly broadcast. It is brought to you at the request. It is brought to you at the request of our audience who have been working with me for the last 2.5 to 3 decades. And most of them have been asking for help from some key players around the globe, which is what we source the best of the best in various industries. I believe in creating small shifts in people such that they could have leveraged long-term gain. And that's how we use the performance excellence model that we work with. My team and I spend weeks and sometimes months scouting for the best of the best in the industry. And we have brought to you people from various sectors. I know you would have met a lady by the name of Anusha some weeks back, a UN disaster recovery. She advises the United Nations on how to handle disaster recovery in different areas where there has been tsunamis, floods, cyclones, and her main thrust has been in women empowerment leadership that is sustainable. And that has been a powerful program for many of you. We've also brought champions in triathlon. We've brought entrepreneurs from the art and culture area. We've brought entrepreneurial couples who started with nothing and ended up having a multi-billion-dollar business across the globe. We have also brought in relationship coaches, parenting and wealth acquisition coaches. Today, we are bringing you a judge all the way from Michigan, a Supreme Court judge. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I would like you to actually help me welcome this gentleman. And before I do call him on stage, I would like to give you a brief about him. A magnificent, exceptional performer with a mindset, more than a mindset, a heartfelt person, a gem of a gentleman from the Michigan Supreme Court, driving a global cause of physically challenged individuals and helping them through the course of coming up in life. You get a chance to observe at close hand the life of this blind judge, how he disciplines himself on his daily routines, and how he puts through working with 25 cases per week. Coming out of a traumatic accident himself, after taking the city of New York to the court, a case against the New York City Council, he today is there sitting on that particular pedestal, helping lay people come up in life and making sure that justice is provided to them. Also, a 24 full marathon completed individual, which means he practices for the marathon triathlon. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome this gem of a person, Justice Richard Bernstein, all the way from Michigan. Welcome aboard.
Thank you,
Richard.
so much, David. I am so excited to be here. I love your energy and spirit, and I'm delighted to be a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you. Richard, what I'd like to do is to kick off with just more a conversation of a little bit about your story, some of the background that you went through as a child and some of the challenges you encountered. I know that you were blind from birth, So how did you get over some of those issues and stigma, so to speak?
Oh, it's a great question. I think that secondary education is the most challenging for people who are
Hmm.
different. And for someone like myself who was awkward and struggled, I think that the lesson that I'm hoping for those people that are listening to us today is that if you're going through a difficult time or your child is going through a difficult time, high school and middle school are always going to be the most challenging. And I think sometimes in life, you just have to focus on getting through it. And if you're able to survive it and get through it, you come to realize that life will always get better.
Right, right. What made you actually drill down into saying, okay, I'm physically disabled. What am I going to do in my life? How did that crystallize for you? And how did you internalize that such that you could come out with pursuing the profession of law?
Well, I think whenever you're dealing, and what I love about the term here in the UAE is people of determination, because it's the perfect description of folks with disabilities and people who have to face challenge and struggle in their lives. And I think what you come to find is like you're going through this is that often it's the experiences that you're going to have. And when you have to go through some difficult experiences and some difficult struggles, I think as you get older and as you work your way through it, you find that that challenge gives you a certain sense of purpose. And that
Hmm.
purpose gives you passion. And that passion gives you reason. And that reason gives you an essence to live your life kind of at a different level. Because why else do you have these experiences if you're not going to use it to translate it into something that's going to impact other people?
Right, right. I love that you have started off or kick-started this whole process with the aim of the purpose you use, and that's fine. That's the heartbeat that I channel my work through. Your why. How did you arrive at your why, your purpose?
I think for me, it kind of took a little bit of time. It doesn't come
Hmm.
easily. I think the more experiences you have, the more you start to realize what you're given those experiences for. So I think for a lot of folks, and since we're talking about what it was like growing up, so much of it starts with your family. And I was
Right.
blessed to have a remarkable family and incredible parents and incredible siblings that basically encouraged you that anything and everything was possible. And I think when you're dealing with blindness or you're dealing with folks with disabilities, a lot of the limitations kind of start with the people around you. And I think so
Mm.
often my kind of quest is to visit with families, to spend time in schools, to visit with folks that are kind of going through that phase right now. And I think the real key is that I was blessed because in my home, there were no limitations. And the expectation was that you should live and experience life to the absolute fullest. And I think that translated into education and it translated into athletics. It translated into every way that you live your life. So I think really, David, the key is that for those listeners who really are going through a difficult time, or for those listeners who have loved ones that are going through a difficult time, the real message you have to give them is that sometimes in life, this isn't your time and you're going to have to go through a little bit of a struggle. But the promise I want to give to everyone who was facing certain challenges that I faced and felt that kind of social isolation because you were different, the thing I will tell you is it might not be your time now, but your time will come. And boy, when it comes, you are going to live a life that you never imagined or thought possible.
Right, right. That's interesting. You made that point primarily because how did you build your mental resilience? Because only when you prepare for that can you then the expectation of it coming. Will you then be able to enjoy it and actually live that life to its fullest at that particular moment?
Sure. You know what happens, David? I think nothing
Yeah.
surprises you. And so at a
Right.
certain point, nothing really shakes you. So, and the key is that you don't always have to enjoy rejection and you don't always have to, be happy. And life isn't always about smiling and trying to be happy all the time. But I think what happens
Hmm.
is that you kind of develop a certain resolve. You develop a certain kind of inner strength But most importantly, you get used to it, right? You get used to certain people's perspectives. You get used to the things that people say to you. You get used to the limitations. And as a result, it doesn't surprise you. And when nothing surprises you, you're able to just kind of move through it because you always say to yourself, wow, I've been here before. I've done this before. I've experienced this before. And it doesn't really throw you off track.
Right, right. I still am perplexed. Why law?
Uh-huh.
Why settle for law?
Well, what's interesting is that I really felt that the law allows for you to have such a powerful impact on people. Because, for me, growing up, I had to deal a lot of times with bullies and I had to get picked on. And those are the kind of standard stories that you always hear. And what I love about the law was that if you actually encounter or see an injustice, you have the power as a lawyer to actually do something about it. You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to find someone to do it for you. If you see something that you feel just isn't right, when you're a lawyer, you literally can make the change just on your own. And nothing excites me more than that notion that if you see something that you feel needs to be made better, that you can take action on your own to actually correct the problem. And I have found that through the law, no matter how powerful the defendant is or how many resources they have, a lot of times these David versus Goliath struggles, if you believed in what you were fighting for, and if you refused to give up, it was incredible that you could actually defy the odds and make some real changes that affected people's lives in a very dramatic fashion.
Right. We're going to talk about that as we go through this journey, because I know you've made a huge impact on a number of sectors in the community, both in the US and abroad. So we'll come down that in downstream of our conversation. I also would like to touch on a concept that you and I touched on earlier in the week, which is called the body, mind, spirit model. How you build your mental stamina and resilience. Now, when on that subject, some of the areas I'd like to address is, how do you, who person can't read or write, actually take on these cases and put 25 of these cases per week?
So I get into a very regimented structure in terms of how I do my work. And that's absolutely correct. There's 25 cases that I'm responsible for each week. And it's interesting, David, what's important to point out is these are very intense cases. These are murder cases, these are rape cases, these are civil cases where you're dealing with environmental regulation, utility regulation, you're dealing with malpractice issues, you're dealing with whether or not parents will ever see their children again. So every one of these matters is far-reaching. And it has to be done right because people's lives are literally hanging in the balance. And your question is, how does it work? 25 cases every single week. Every one of them affects people in the community and the whole state. And you can't see. So do you put the cases into Braille? Do you use a computer? Well, every Wednesday, the 7 justices on the Supreme Court of Michigan gather for conference where we make determinations and decisions that are forever. So if we deny a case, that's it. A person will spend the rest of their life in prison. And so the way that it works is you've got 25 cases and you're going to vote on each and every one of those cases. So people say, well, okay, do you put the cases into Braille? And the answer is no, you can't, because if you're dealing with a murder case, you're going to have a 3-week transcript. So you can't put it into Braille because if I give you 1 textbook page, you're going to give me 65 Braille pages. So Braille's not going to work. So then people say, well, what about using your computer? Can you use technology? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is if I'm listening to my headset, I can't communicate with the other judges. So the way that I prepare is I memorize all 25 cases. I know them backwards and forwards. And the way it works is the commissioner will say, okay, justices, we are now at case 18. Case 18 is a carjacking on Woodward Avenue that resulted in 2 homicides. When I hear the fact pattern, it becomes my mental trigger, and I'm able to recall the case in its entirety to the point that I can debate and discuss the case with you and all the corresponding legal issues that are relevant. And very quickly, there's one other little challenge. We're a common law system. So not only do I have to internalize the case that I'm voting on, but I have to know all the relevant cases that work in my favor, and I have to know all the relevant cases that work against my argument. So that way I can distinguish and say, look, even though that case says X, the fact pattern is different in the case that we're discussing today. So it's a wholly different case. So ultimately, you have to know the case backwards and forwards, and you have to know all the corresponding common law cases that are relevant to make your argument to your colleagues as to what you think the court should do and how you think the court should proceed on every case that comes before us.
Right, right. Now, how do you get that information transferred from your team or your aides to you?
Right.
What is the process? I think the audience needs to know this. I loved it when I heard
it. So the way that it works, David, is I get one additional clerks. The other justices get 5 clerks. I have 6 clerks. And what I do is, because as you had indicated, I'm not reading and writing, so I exercise as I am learning the material. And I take my cell phone and I work with my clerks for hours and hours and hours internalizing the material. And what I like to do is I like to go for long walks, because it doesn't make sense for me to sit at a desk, because I'm not reading and writing. So if that's the case, I can go out for 6, 7, 8-hour walks and literally walk for about 20 miles, take my phone, take my charger, and internalize materials with my clerks, which is they'll read you the cases and I will go through them in a very, very deliberate fashion, learn them to such an extent that when Wednesday comes, I have all the information processed into my mind by basically walking and listening and working. And I find that as I walk, that it makes it easier for me to process information. I'm more at peace. I'm calmer, I'm more at ease. And I find with the 8-hour walk, with the memorization, I find that I make better decisions because I'm in a better state of mind.
Right. Now, 2 things you spoke about there: better decisions and better state of mind. Now, one of the things I'd like you to address further into is, when you say better decisions, is there a logical approach that you take mentally to what I call like the Benjamin Franklin close, or one of the other closes, to weigh the situations up and say the pros and cons are this, and this is what I'm going to go for? How do you make that decision to drill down?
So the thing is that when you are a Supreme Court justice for your state, there's 800 judges that kind of report to us. So you're the last word in all of Michigan law. And in many situations, you're people's last hope. There's nowhere to go after us. And it's literally people's entire lives that are being decided. So I think, in answer to your question, you have to approach every case in the absolute right state of mind, because it's a soul, it's a spirit, it's a life that's ultimately going to be impacted by what you decide. And I think, in answer to your question, I think it's more about the fact that you can't let any fact go unexplained. You can't let any inconsistency go unanswered. You have to make sure that you get it right, because there's no room for error. So the exercise is important, because what it does is it creates a level of patience. See, what happens, David, is I'm working 12 hours a day. And the most important thing is that when you start off fresh and you're at case 1, you're going to feel differently than when you're at case 24. But you have to make sure that you process case 24 with the same intensity and veracity that you do for case 1. And so I think the key with the mind-body-spirit connection is that when you're exercising, and if your body is in a good place, your mind will follow, because you don't rush. and you focus. You never
Right.
lose that focus.
And to get your mind, body, spirit in congruency, I call it. How,
Yes.
okay, to explain the mind and the body, that the path that you're currently working towards. How do you get the spirit into existence? What do you actually do on a regular basis, or even once a week, whatever? How do you fine tune that to keep it at its cutting edge?
I think a lot of it is that, and I think the beauty that kind of comes with it is that I tend to be kind of a spiritual person kind of in general. And I think
Hmm.
for me, I'm always looking for that connection with the creator. And I think
Right,
that when you're trying to find that connection, what you're really looking for is a sense of peace. And you come
right,
to realize when you're doing it in a spiritual dimension that you're serving as a judge because ultimately you're serving as a vehicle for justice. And
right,
when you take on this responsibility, you don't take it on to wear the robe or have the title. You take it on because you want to make sure that you're serving people properly. And
right,
ultimately, you want to make sure that, going back to the beginning of our conversation, that the experiences that God gives us are being used to pass judgment in the appropriate way. The more
right,
struggle, the more pain, the more challenge a person has, the better equipped they are to be in this position. But a person who doesn't know hardship or struggle or difficulty, I don't believe should be a judge because they lack the empathy, the compassion, the understanding, the warmth to have a connection with those who they're judging.
right. Richard, when we talk about internalizing this, and you have obviously core values which all of the judges do have,
Yes.
and if there is a disconnect with one of those values in how you behave or how you practice or how you say certain things and do certain things, do you think the judgment would be fair and just? And also, do you actually feel that mentally you are in sync to provide the right decision for a person?
That is a fantastic question. I have to say, this is one of the best experiences I've ever had participating in. These are some of the most thought-provoking questions I've ever been given. And I
Right.
will
Thank
say,
you.
David, that ultimately, I don't think any judge, this is just me, I don't believe that any high court judge always sleeps easy. I think any high court judge is up all night questioning every decision that they have made. Anyone who serves in this position who is absolutely certain about every decision that they have made shouldn't be doing this job because
Right.
you need to be doubtful, you need to question, there needs to be a sense of concern. I really believe in that regard, it allows for you to realize that you're actually doing your job when you don't sleep.
Right, right. So good, so true. Now, moving on from that into the body aspect of it, I'm
Yes,
led to believe you are an Ironman and triathlete.
that's correct.
That's part
Yes.
of the story. Oh,
So,
let me also add to that. You have completed 24 marathons. Why don't we club the two together and share your experience on this? You know, being a triathlete and a marathon, completing them. How do you
yes.
do it?
Well, thank you, David. So yes, I have been blessed to have completed 24 marathons and a full Ironman competition. And for those in the audience that aren't familiar with the Ironman, it is a 2.4-mile swim followed by a
Hmm.
112-mile bike to be completed by a 26.2-mile run. And if you
Right,
stop, if you rest, if you take a break, you miss a cutoff. And if that happens, you're immediately disqualified from the competition without exception.
right,
So your
right.
question is really, why on earth would you do 24 marathons? And then why on earth would you want to participate in an Ironman competition if you don't have any vision and you can't see? And
Hmm.
the reason that I do these things is it goes back to the original question that you had asked, which is I do it because it's how I connect with God. I feel that it
Right.
allows for me to have a connection with the creator. Because I think what happens for people that struggle with disability, like I do my entire life, is you come to find that you always have a self-confidence issue. Like growing up, when you're the only blind guy in your school and you couldn't do anything athletic, there's always a confidence issue. And if you don't have confidence, it translates into every other aspect of your life. And I felt that through athletics and through Achilles, which is a program that works with people like me to provide training and guides so that we can participate in all of these competitions, it gave me a sense of confidence. It gave me a sense of strength. But what it also allowed me to realize was that, you know what? Yeah, my body is mortal, and I have some very severe limitations because of my disability. But I think when you're doing something that intense, you find that your spirit is incredibly resilient, and that the resiliency of your spirit allows for you to disconnect from the limitations of the body, and I believe give your opportunity for your soul to really pierce the heavens.
Wow. Now, when you have that type of a mental state and a frame of mind to work with,
Right.
when you first start, you would not have had that. You had to do some practices to master this trait. Now, just share with the audience how much of actual work, as an example, take one example, one trait, did you have to into to master to get that state of excellence that you want, which will continue to improve every time? How much did you have to put in to acquire that?
The first thing that you have to do is, it's incredibly humbling, because as a blind athlete, you have to put your entire life in the hands of your team. So you have to basically have tremendous trust in the people that are guiding you. And you have to follow all of their directional cues. So the way it works, David, is that you run with a team and you have guides that are giving you directional cues. Hard right, hard left, soft left. And you run on a tether so you can feel the motion of their body and you can feel the movement of their body. And then when they give you the directional cues, you know which way you're supposed to turn and how you're supposed to run. Now, that's how you do the 24 marathons. But your bigger question is, how do you practice for the Ironman competition, where you have the swimming, the biking, and the running? And that took 2 years of training and work in order to be ready for the Ironman. Now, I want your audience, if they could, to picture what it's like to dive into a frigid body of water. The water temperature that morning of Lake Coeur d'Alene was 55 degrees. I want you to imagine swimming in total darkness. You don't know where you started, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know where you are. Now imagine being the only blind competitor and getting kicked in the face by all the other swimmers. And being blind, you can't brace for the impact. And then I want you to imagine one more thing. Other swimmers become entangled in the rope that connects you to your guide. And when that happens, the rope becomes ensnared. And when the rope becomes constrictive, it starts taking you below the surface. So it makes getting oxygen impossible. So you start to feel a drowning sensation. And I can tell you, when you feel that sense of not getting oxygen or air, and you feel that sense of drowning, you come to know God. Because at that point, at that moment, you have to release yourself to Him, and you have to have trust in Him and your team to get you through it. And you have to find that the body isn't everything, that the spirit, the mind, the soul connection that you speak of, that's what's going to allow for you to have the calm and the strength and the inner peace to work through the swim, to board your bike and ride for 112 miles in the mountains. Rely on your guide, who's going to tell you, okay, lean hard right, lean hard left. And if you don't lean hard right, the moment he tells you, the bike is going to flip over. because you're going at
Yes.
speeds of over 50 miles an hour. And then after you finish your bike, you then run your 26.2 mile marathon, and 14 hours and 36 minutes later, you have completed your mission and you have found that sense of peace that is like no other.
You know something, Richard? It's your story now as you're sharing it. It gives me a reflection back. About 4 weeks ago, I had on this platform a triathlon champion. Now she was and she's a gold medalist. Now she was a coachee of mine in 2004, and she was what you just spoke about in relation to the swim. Now a disaster happened to her while she was swimming. A jellyfish bite, and through that she suffered, and she didn't want to give up, so she kept going until she finished that. She picked up a bike, and as she was riding, because she had to lean on and this bite, she slipped and the bike fell on her and it crashed. Kilometers to the completion of the racing part of that bike segment, I should say. She picks up the bike and she continues running with it till she finishes the post. Then she does her running, and she came third in that race.
Oh my God.
And I asked her at the end of that, what did you do? And she said, you know something? God was with me. And the other thing was, I learned the art of affirmations and visualization. And all I could see, sir, she calls me sir, all I could see was your visualization techniques to me for finishing that line. I could see the ribbon there. And that's all I could see.
Wow.
And she got third.
Wow. I got to tell you something.
That's the power. Yeah.
I was happy just to finish. My goal was just to survive. If I just finishing was my whole goal.
Right. That's fabulous. They're really good.
I wasn't showing off. I just wanted to complete the race.
Right. It's really good. I'm so pleased, so pleased that I'm now able to relate when I bring speakers like yourselves and Aarti, on board. There is so much of similarities, and it's amazing whether you do sport or whether you do business or whether you're a teacher or whatever. The traits of what you need to master that skill is parallel and similar across all platforms. Right. But once you get mastery, and having the sync of body, mind, and soul, and being trustworthy and with integrity, you run this, the faith runs with you to fulfill it.
Yeah, that's beautiful and true.
Right, so true. While I'm talking, let me just raise a question. There was a question raised by one of the audiences. How did he do the marathon? Now you've shared that. That's very good. Thank you so much. Just this story made me emotional, and I'm tear-eyed. He is indeed a miracle man.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you. I always tell people it helps not to know me, because once you get to know me, it goes downhill pretty quick.
Right. Let me continue. I want to touch on another aspect, which this is why I talk to my speakers before they come on the platform to really get to know them. You shared a magnificent story about how you nearly lost your life in an accident, and then the whole thing turned around for you, and your breakthrough in doing what you're doing today happened from that accident. Would you like to share that, please?
Yes, thank you, David. So I think what you come to realize is that life can change in an instant without any notice or warning. And I was in New York City at this time, 17 marathons and a full Ironman. And I was walking in Central Park, and I've memorized the park so I can walk independently without having an escort or guide. And as I was walking, a bicyclist was traveling over 35 miles an hour. And when he hit the top of the park's highest hill, he wasn't able to control the bike and veered into the pedestrian lane where I was walking. And then, David, he struck me directly in the back at 35 miles an hour. And it was a catastrophic injury. Just to kind of give some perspective, I was in New York's Mount Sinai Hospital for over 10 weeks. And I think what was challenging about it, David, was that I had used athletics as a way to find that purpose that we were talking about. And it gave me that strength, and it gave me a sense of independence, right? Like I might be blind, but I could still be a great athlete. And here I was at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital, and literally, David, I had to start all over again. And that was the most difficult, was the fact that my whole body was shattered and I couldn't do a single thing for myself. I couldn't use the toilets. I couldn't take a shower. I couldn't sleep through the night without having to writhe in like an indescribable level of pain. And just very quickly, like what I kind of learned from that was that people used to come to visit me at the hospital. And I'd always ask them, so when you leave Sinai, where are you going to go and what are you going to do? And they'd always say in a very kind of mundane way that, oh, I'm going to go and visit some friends or run some errands. And I'd always tell them, I'd always say, you know what? Those are the things I dream about at night. Those simple things that you're not thinking about. Like what it's like to sit in a restaurant and smell the food and hear the dishes and the clanging of the silverware on the glasses and the conversation and all of that. I always said, you know, life is never about big things. It's always about small things because it's the small things that kind of go to our inner core. And it's the small things that go to life at its true essence. And those were the things that I would dream about and pray for every night. Like what it would be like to feel fresh air. Because I hadn't had a chance to go outside in 10 weeks. And I said to myself, wow, what would that feel like to go? I would ask people, what is the lobby of Mount Sinai like? Like, what is there? Are there people? Is it exciting? And what does it feel like when you go outside and the air is like not circulated, but fresh? Like, what is that like? And trauma patients come to realize that, you know what? Life is lived at its core because I say it like over and over, but it's so true. It's not big things, it's small things.
Yes, I love it when you've repeated this again, following our discussion previously, and I love that. And I carry this phrase with me, and I always drill this for my teams, is small shifts generate gains.
Yes.
And as long as we can master, you talked about mastery earlier, as long as we can master the small shifts for what you're looking at from where you were with that accident to have this visualization of saying, I want to get out of this hospital and this is what I'm going to do. I got to learn how to just get one step at a time. So by such a time I can get out. Now that's fabulous. And I hope the audience can pick that and actually understand the term patience and understand the term tolerance and understand the term of how all of this put together is what gets them out to where they want the outcome to be.
You know what's interesting, David? That's such a great point. So it took me just as much effort to start walking with a walker than it did to do the Ironman, right? The amount of work that had to go into, getting onto a walker and the amount of effort that it took just to get to the end of the ward was probably equivalent to all the training that I had to put into doing the Ironman. And keep this in mind, though, at the time of the accident, it had been 17 marathons and a full Ironman. And what was interesting was now I live with what you call chronic pain, which is the pain is just kind of always there. It's just a part of you, right? You wake up with it, you go to sleep with it, it bothers you through the night. It's just something that kind of is now part of your identity. And for all intents and purposes, it just kind of makes you who you are. It is what it is, right? You don't like it. It's not something I would wish on anyone, but it is just something I don't have control over. But what was interesting was I found, in terms of what we were talking about with the mind-body connection, that in life, David, what is so important is so often when you deal with folks who are dealing with catastrophic injuries, people will always say, oh, you know, are you going to make a full recovery? Because you hear it in the press all the time. People will always say, oh, yes, that person was injured, but they are expected to make a full recovery. And that's something you should never say. Never say to someone, oh, you're going to make a full recovery. Because honestly, David, most people don't make full recoveries. It's just, in many situations, it just is what it is, right? You don't get to make a full recovery always in life. But you know what the secret is? The secret is how you can adapt. So don't
Right.
always think about that, okay, I'm going to recover. Think about the notion that you are going to adapt, because the people who can adapt are the people that can move forward. It's that power of adapting to your new life, to your new circumstance, to everything that you might not want, but adapting to a new way of living. And honestly, David, so I don't want to go on too long, but when I came out of the hospital, I was dedicated to doing a marathon. I wouldn't stop. I would not give up. I was dedicated to it. And so my 18th marathon came after I got out of the hospital. And I have to just say very quick, as I was running through the streets of New York, now you have to understand, I had catastrophic injuries, but I was still out. Now, David, this was not going to be like a great marathon. There wouldn't be like a PR broken. It wasn't going to be the kind of marathon that was going to be like fantastic. But it was a marathon that I was going to finish. Like, it was a marathon I was going to complete. And I just have to say, as we crossed the 59th Street Bridge and began running up First Avenue at mile 18 for my 18th marathon, but for the first after a catastrophic injury, the pain was becoming so severe. And David, it was so intense that I remember reaching up to the heavens, and I remember praying to the Creator and saying, God, please just let me have this. I just need this. Please let me do this. I'm working through the pain, but don't let me pass out. Don't let me lose consciousness. Let me reach this finish line. And I just have to say that something remarkable happened. It's always at the moment where you're going through the deepest struggle and you can feel the storm raging, your anger and your frustration, your disappointment with God. And you literally can hear the thunder and you can feel the rain and you can sense the lightning and you can see it happening within your body. And that it's always at that moment that a miracle happens where you literally find what you're looking for. You're able to come to peace. Peace with your new life, peace with your new body, peace with your new circumstance. But right there on First Avenue at mile 18, I was able to find my peace with God.
Wow. Wow. So does that moment that you spoke about in reaching out, is that same process you use each time a negative person throws something negative at you whilst you're journeying through in the traumatic case, or when your little self-talk, the shoulder that's sitting up here says to you, Richard, who do you think you are? Do you think you can do this? The self-doubt comes to play. How do you push that aside and actually focus on reaching for that help from the universe, from God?
It has to be, because it has to be bigger than yourself. It has to be something that is larger than you. And what does that mean? And you know, just what I found was that in order for me to kind of live, because remember, before my accident, I was born blind, but I was in such great health. It was like I was in mint condition. It was incredible. And now I have to lug around with pain every day. And I just think that really what it came down to was, for me, in order to move on from this accident, there had to be a purpose. It couldn't just be a sad thing. It couldn't just be like, oh, that's such an unfortunate thing that you had this accident. It had to be bigger. It just had to be bigger than that. And that's why I took the city of New York to court. Now, not for a dime or a nickel or a cent. I didn't want a single thing from the city of New York. Not a single thing. And I had no issues whatsoever with the person that hit me. I knew it was a mistake. Things happened, and I told him he should just move forward. But for the city of New York, I didn't want money from them, but I wanted them to fix the park. And I wanted them to make it better because they could. And they knew they could. But it was just because inertia that these accidents were happening. And what was one of the tragic things was during the litigation that I had with the city of New York, there were 2 other people that got struck by bicyclists who were killed. It was a very different outcome from them. I live in pain, but these 2 people were killed. And this happened during the time that we were litigating with the city to get them to make Central Park a safer and better place. And ultimately, David, it took a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of effort. But the city did transform the park, and they did make a lot of changes, and they did make a lot of corrections. Now, look, it's not going to be totally safe. Accidents are still going to happen. But the one thing I can cling to is that we left the situation better than we had found it. And at least
Yes.
I have that. So even with the pain of the accident, it comes with a sense that it wasn't for nothing, but it resulted in making things better for others.
Fabulous, fabulous. And see, that's the buzz that happens within you. Once you have been able to do something like that in a contributory level, imagine what it's taken you from that state to now doing some extra contributory work globally. Before we get to that, I would like to address the cases that you talked about. At least 3 of them that come to my mind is the Delta case, for example. Would you like to share what happened there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I used to love being a lawyer. And it's interesting, David, the biggest transition that you have to make going from a litigator or a public service attorney, the way I was for 15 years, to being a judge is that you go from being a part of the game to now reffing the game. So now you have to be a ref. You're not able to be on the field. But with Delta, it wasn't always the case that people with disabilities could fly. And it was very challenging for folks with special needs. And I was really excited to be a part of that case because what it allowed to happen was any airline that has a U.S. landing certificate basically has to adhere to the rules and regulations that came out of this litigation. And it basically set forth guidelines and parameters for how you build airports, how you modify airports, and how airlines function in terms of transporting those passengers with disabilities. And the great thing that came out of the Delta case, and that comes out of most cases, is that what you tend to find is that what is good for people with disabilities is good for everyone. So when you make modifications for passengers with special needs, you actually make the entire experience better for everyone. And the greatest thing was Delta was wonderful to work with because they came to realize this, and they even said, you know what? We're going to go beyond what the court has required us to do and make it even better for disabled people because we realize, A, it's the right thing to do, but B, we can do it. And there's no reason why we shouldn't.
Right. That's and that's really fabulous because from that, obviously, the next case that came through that I recall was your roundabout case. Remember that situation that you went through?
Yes, and the roundabouts were interesting because I know where a lot of your listeners are at. They have roundabouts, and roundabouts are kind of a new way of doing traffic control because the traffic has to continually move at all times. But the challenge is if you build a roundabout and you don't have modifications, a blind person can't cross the street or a disabled person can't cross the street because the traffic doesn't ever stop. It's always moving. So basically what this case did was it set the guidelines and parameters for all road construction throughout the United States. So that if you're going to build a roundabout, you have to have some type of traffic control device that can be pedestrian activated so that you can cross the street safely. And what was interesting was after this litigation, cities and towns that built roundabouts now have what they call the Hawk system, which is a special traffic control device that you activate if you want to cross the street. And guess what? It's not just for people with disabilities that have benefited, but children, seniors, anyone that has to navigate across the street has found it to be very helpful and effective.
Extremely so, because I've noticed that in a number of cities in the Asia Pacific region, because roundabouts were more economical to utilize and use. rather than there's flyovers that they have to construct. So with
Correct.
that roundabouts and having stop, look, go signs that they can press the button, and in some places they've actually gone one step ahead and put in zebra crossings plus the roundabout plus that corrugated road fill, so a person with wheelchair or a blind person can see that they're going across those. Now
Yep.
that's been a marked improvement in our countries, like in Malaysia, Singapore, places like that.
Absolutely, but it's got to start somewhere, right? So in many
Yes,
situations, I think a lot of it started out of Oakland County, Michigan. So that's the
yes.
thing. You never realize, the change that is being made. But in this one, it was about keeping people safe.
Yeah, right. That's really good. Now, the other thing I would like to talk about is now you have a global mission
Yes.
with a purpose for physically disabled. Would you like to share that and then actually crystallize your real mission with your values that you're going to do, or your why, I should say, that you're going to drive with for the next couple of years?
So Dave, that's such a great question. So what's important for your listeners to know is that in Michigan, if you want to serve on the highest court, we're actually elected. So we are not appointed. If you want to be in
Mm,
this position, you have to convince 11 million people in the great state of Michigan that you have the capacity and the ability to serve them in this way. And what was
right.
fascinating about it was that you had to convince them that a blind person could actually do this job because it had never been done before. And what I loved about the electoral process versus the appointment process was if it had been an appointment process, they never would have given me this job because they would have
Right.
said, that's so inspirational that this blind guy wants to do it, but we all know he can't. But the people of the state of Michigan, when you go from town to town and city to city and county to county, they were open to it. And they said, you know what? A blind person is a great idea because you know why? He understands my struggles and my challenges and my difficulties. He understands what it's like to have to go through life and have to basically face obstacles. And as a result, I think that through that struggle and through that hardship, he can serve me and my family better through understanding. And what I learned after kind of running for this position and connecting with people across the state and them giving you an opportunity to serve is you have to do it well. There is no room for failure because if someone is giving you this chance, if the people are saying we are going to do this, you cannot disappoint them. You cannot let them down because I chose to do this. And if I don't do this well, and I mean, David, I have to do this perfectly well because if I don't, it's going to make it impossible for someone to follow me. If you choose to be the first, you have to be the best because there is
Mm,
simply no excuse for those who are going to follow. And I think in answer to your question, what I saw in running for this position was that people were able to realize possibilities in themselves, but most importantly, they realized that their children could take a different trajectory, that they could live a different life, that they could do different things, and that their expectations should now be higher. And so, in answer to your question, I just simply want to take what we've done in Michigan to create this opportunity, which ultimately helped to modify and change an entire state court system to allow for it to function better, not just for the disabled, but to function better for everyone. And my goal is to travel to any place that will have me so that we can simply allow for people to realize what is possible, but most importantly, in a technical sense, to show people how you can make simple modifications, how you can hire someone that you might not have, how you can give someone a chance that you might have overlooked, and how you can say to someone, if they come to interview you, that, wow, this person looks totally different, but this person is someone I am going to take a chance on. It's easy to go with the person that checks all the boxes and doesn't require a lot of work, but it's harder to go with someone like me. And I just want employers and people and governments to say, okay, we realize this is more work. We realize this is more effort. And you know what? We realize that we have to take a chance. But if they take that chance, they will have an employee, they will have a person, they will have a family that will be so incredibly loyal, that will do the job with such gusto and such excitement and such enthusiasm and such passion, because they will see such gratitude and purpose in it, that you will have someone and you will have people that will work in ways and do things that you have never seen before. But you just have to give them a chance. And the idea here is that people with disabilities, we know what we can accomplish. We know what we can achieve. We just need for able-bodied people to provide us the opportunity.
Wow. I'm getting personal messages, direct messages coming in, and some of them are saying, this man is mesmerizing. Richard, I'd love you to share a couple of just quick tidbits on countries that you have gone to and worked and tried to get some mods done there. Places,
Sure.
I think Canada, UAE, and some of those places. Can you just share?
Oh, thank you so much. So basically, it's I've had the opportunity to work with the United Nations, and I've
Yes.
had the opportunity to basically work with many countries all across the world. Everywhere from Israel, where we were able to help create their disability rights program that created opportunities for people within military service, as well as with employment within government and private sector. I loved having the chance to visit Austria, where basically we had an opportunity to kind of work with their judicial institutes through the United Nations to help create opportunities for blind people who wish to serve as judges, because it was very difficult for blind people to become judges because they had to go to school for it, and it was very challenging to get into those programs. And so I loved having a chance to work with those folks. I loved coming to your country, Australia, when you guys were passing your Disabilities Rights Act. I love having the chance to go all through South America, everywhere from Ecuador to Brazil to Mexico to all various types of countries. So basically, the key is, the way that I would say it is, there's a theme that develops when you go from country to country, whether it's like Canada to Mexico to the UAE to Israel to Australia to Europe to Asia to the Middle East to India. Love India. Absolutely love India. I was just in India a short time ago, and I can't say enough wonderful things about it, because you couldn't find warmer, kinder people than you have in India. But my hope is that we're going to make change in India, because now there's actually a law that says that blind people can't serve as judges. So my hope is that if we're able to work on that, we can modify that. And I would just say very quickly, the way I would kind of answer that question about the international work is, my goal, David, is I want for blind people to become judges. And you're thinking, and it goes back to kind of what you write about, right? You're thinking to yourself, well, why is that important? Why are you traveling to India to try to convince the Indian Supreme Court to modify their position to allow for people who are blind to serve as judges? With everything going on in the world, with all the other challenges that people with disabilities face, why on earth is this even remotely important that you want some blind person to serve as a judge? And the answer is this, is that judges are critical because we're making decisions that affect other people. And if people see somebody with a severe disability in that capacity, in that position, where they are rendering judgments that affect other people's lives, then what that does, David, is it goes to exactly what you write about. It allows for people to realize potential. So yes, not every blind person or disabled person is going to become a judge. But you might say, well, wait a minute. If a blind person can be a judge, then think about all the other things that a disabled person can do that we didn't think about. If they can do this high position and judge another person, then, well, wait a minute. Let's assess all the other things that we have disqualified them from, reassess that, and allow for them to shine and do things in other ways in other venues.
Right. So wonderful, wonderful. And it's so true when you think about it, because if one can do it, the domino effect of multiple areas that you could work with and multiple platforms in which non-blind people can be excelled out because they're open to this idea.
David, that's the whole idea, right? So in this
Yes.
situation, you have to start with something grand. like someone who's
Yes.
blind or disabled serving in that capacity, because what's going to happen is yes, you're going to affect a small number of blind people that might be serving in that position, but it's going to ricochet in every other position, in every other area, in every other venue, where you're going to start to say, well, wait a minute, if they can do that job, then why can't we allow them to do this one?
Exactly.
So
Richard,
anywhere and everyone that will have me, I will come.
I will make sure. I'll make sure we have you in a number of areas, both in Australia, Singapore, India, and we will push for that. Now, one of the things I also would like to really thank you is I've had a new friend in the last fortnight. And little did I realize when our first connect happened that this is what's going to do and this is what's going to transpire. But a lot has come through, and we would like to see it taken further and for the benefit of humanity more than anything else. And that's my goal in working the type of work that I'm doing. And to see somebody with parity ideas and in line with that synchronicity, I'd love to see what else we can do. Richard, thank you. It's been a great pleasure connecting and working with you. But before we say ciao, I just ask you for a quick comment, probably in 30 seconds. What is one key area or key element that you can give to the audience to say, catch on to this and go make your life better?
You know what? You can't take yourself so seriously. You can't take everything so seriously. And I'll say it in very, very quick. It all comes back to my mom and dad. Especially, this story goes to my mom. When I was campaigning all across Michigan, I remember saying to my mom, I said, Mom, I just can't do this anymore. I'm doing 10 events every single day. I am so exhausted. I just can't do another event. And my mom finally says to me, she says, oh, come on, enough complaining. She says, basically what you're doing is you're going around the state of Michigan and you're talking about your absolute most favorite subject, yourself. She says, nobody loves you more than you. She says, you get out there and just, are you kidding me? And, what are you talking about? You're basically going out and talking about you, which is what you love to do, is talk about you. So get over it. And then she said something so funny. She was like, it's so funny because people will come to my parents and they'll say, oh my God, your son is blind and he's traveling and he's doing all these things and it's so remarkable. And then like my mom and dad are like, yeah, that's his job. That's not what he's supposed to do. Like that's what he's supposed to do. That's so great. Like, you know what? Like our expectation is that's what he's supposed, that's his job. Just whatever, get over it.
Right.
That's my life.
Right. Richard, I am so glad to have had you on board for the last hour. I wish we could it, but what I would do would be, I promise you, downstream, 4, 6, 8 weeks downstream, I'd like to bring you back on, and we will now narrow it down to specific areas that we can enhance and enlighten the audience, and this awareness hopefully will create a shift in a lot of people's mindsets.
I would love it. But David, sequels are never as good. So it's going to be like Beverly Hills Cop 2. Like Beverly Hills Cop 1 was great, but like I hope we can keep the sequel as good as the original.
Yes, you hit it on the head, pal. Really good. And also, please thank Bushra. I love what she's doing, and both of you are doing an excellent job. Thank you so much for coming online, and we will reconnect again. Take care. God bless you.
God bless.